Hello, art teachers. Today we're going to talk about painting with kindergarten through fifth grade. There are so many different types of paint, and it can be really confusing for a new art teacher to figure out what paint do I use when. Now, this really varies by teacher and program. You don't have to have all of these paints. Some teachers love some and hate others, and you might feel completely opposite. This is just a quick overview of how one art teacher incorporates the different paints to give you some ideas for your own program. One thing that drives me crazy as an art teacher is when the other teachers at the school will send a child to my door and say, "Do you have any paint we can borrow?" And I have to say, "What kind of paint?" And they say, paint. So there's no sense in explaining this to a second grader at my door, but hopefully it'll help you. So as usual, I'm going to go in order from kindergarten up through fifth grade. And if you want to skip ahead to the upper grades, you can do that. So my first paint project with kindergartners is stamping circles. For this, we use liquid tempera because it's bright, thick, and easy to clean up. I also use these round foam stamps because the lesson I'm teaching is all about circles. The objective of this lesson is just to establish art room painting routine. I have them come in and put on their aprons. We've got paint, but I'm not introducing any water yet. And also where we put things on the drawing rack when we're done. And washing hands at the end. So because they're kindergartners, this is our first painting, I want the actual painting to be pretty minimal because I'm teaching all of these routines. I do this one pretty early in the year when we're working on our shape unit. Much later in the year, end of third quarter, maybe fourth quarter, the kindergartners do tissue paper collage. And for this, they're using a paintbrush, but they're not actually using paint. My objective here is to introduce them to brushes, how to use them, how to take care of them. And I've got glue water. That's how we're adding on these pre-cut tissue paper shapes. This way I can teach them about dipping the brush in the liquid and painting and using the brush properly without having a big mess of different colored paints. Of course, we're putting on the aprons and we're using the drying rack, and we will be washing our hands. This comes out really cool. This is part of my collage curriculum lineup. And one thing you have to worry about painting with the young kids is how they keep painting over the same spot and making it really muddy. And the tissue paper shapes, instead of paint, helps them come out with a really good result rather than a muddy mess. In first grade, we actually start painting with colors, and I love to use this cake tempera. I only have it in the 6 colors. No black, no white. A 6-color set is everything they need. It's easy to manage. You can get 9 color sets with different purples and greens and whatnot, but it's just not necessary. And the first graders are free painting, which means they don't have any particular project to copy. They're just learning to use their paints. So our objectives here are materials management. They're learning how to set up the elements of the water, the paint, the brushes, the paper. Because I'm a tab teacher, having them set up and clean up as much as possible themselves is very important to the process. Now, I do not know why these children in this picture are not wearing aprons, but putting on the aprons is part of the process. Sitting in your seat, not touching what's already on the table, waiting to be called. I only have one sink, so we got to have a process for, getting the water and dumping things in the sink at the end. They all want to get in there and wash dishes and wash their hands. I do have them draw a picture with pencil for their first drawing. Again, that gives them some structure and keeps them from just painting as quickly as they can. After the first one, I encourage them to draw a picture with pencil first, but that doesn't always happen. So these are some of my favorites from over the years. You can see the tempera has a nice bold colors. They work on a heavyweight paper. I use tag stock. It's quick drawing and really easy for the younger kids to use. Second grade, we're still using the cake tempera, and their first painting assignment is to paint the color wheel. And after that, they can have a free paint. The objective is drawing and painting the color wheel and color mixing, and of course the setup and cleanup. For this project, I only give them the primary colors. Once they've painted the primary colors, then the objective is to mix the primary colors into the secondary and put them in the proper spot on the wheel. Once they've done that, then they can have all the colors and they can free paint. And at this age, mixing the colors with the larger tempera paints in big mixing trays is so much easier than trying to do it with the much smaller watercolor pans. I do have a big collection of laminated idea cards with simple line drawings on them. We use this for all sorts of different projects, but both the first and the second graders, and to some extent the older kids, will use these idea cards to make line drawings for their paintings. And then in addition to the main drawing they've copied, they can add whatever details they like. Third grade, that's when I introduced watercolors. Watercolor is often viewed as an easy starter paint and given to young children, but watercolor is actually pretty tricky and it's very small, so I really don't recommend it for anyone younger than third grade. We use the pan watercolor. I take that strip out of the box. I don't have the whole clam case for them. I just have the strips for them. And their first assignment is to make a value scale. So my objective here is teaching them to use visual resources. Up till this point, they've been mostly making artwork just from their own imagination, sometimes using the idea cards. But these drawing books have a little more sophisticated, complicated, step-by-step instructions. We do the drawing on one day, and they can make multiple drawings, put their name on them, and then have them ready to paint after they've created their value scale. I have a big variety of all types of drawing books, and that's part of the lesson, that sometimes you have to look through a lot of resources until you find the one you want. It's not necessarily going to be the first thing you look at. Next day, we've got a lesson on value. I use the Scratch Garden video. We talk about a value scale, and I call this the painting test. They have to pass the test of painting the value scale before they can free paint. And then they can paint whatever they like. Fourth grade, back to watercolors, but this time we're concentrating on some more techniques. My classes are 50 minutes long. This takes usually about a class and a half to get through all of these, depending on how much focus we've got. So I've got 6 squares here, and there are many different techniques that you could use. I just start with 6 because I don't want to overwhelm them, and I do want them to get to their own painting as quickly as possible. You could switch any of these out for any other interesting technique that you know. I use the document camera for this. After we've walked through all these together, then they can free paint using whatever techniques they like. In 5th grade, we're using the watercolor again to paint a landscape. The objective of the landscape painting is understanding that things that are closer to you are bigger, in the middle ground, they're middle size, and things that are very far away from you are so tiny that you wouldn't be able to see them. So in their assignment, they have to have a horizon line, foreground, middle ground, and background. And I have them draw that out on paper first. Once they have drawn their picture on a practice paper, and I have approved it because it has all the elements it has to have, then they can transfer that to a piece of watercolor paper, and they tend to not make their borders very straight, but I have them put a border on there so that they don't paint all the way to the edge. That's also working on ruler skills that we seem to have been a little wonky on this one. So you can see that this student has met all these criteria, so they can go ahead and paint. And here are some of my students in action and their finished work. I let them paint whatever they want, as long as it has a horizon line, something large in the foreground, and that the middle ground and background are correctly sized. Later in the 5th grade, we get out the acrylic and we do some color theory exercises. The objective here is to understand and choose a color scheme, to mix the colors for value, and they get to choose a complementary, analogous, or monochromatic color scheme. And we paint on whatever I happen to have, sometimes canvases, sometimes records. Subject matter is not important, and unlike the other assignment, perspective is not important. I'm just wanting them to play with colors, understand colors, and also understand how this thicker body medium is different from watercolor. An alternate assignment, depending on if I have enough time and supplies, is some Panhandle Slim inspired self-portrait. Panhandle Slim is a contemporary artist. He lives in Savannah, Georgia, and he is my favorite contemporary artist. His work is a great inspiration for a first canvas painting because he does these naive self-portraits with a statement. So they don't have to worry about realism or depth or shading. They can paint in a very flat style, and his work is very driven by social justice, diversity, and personal human stories. The work is flat and bright and stylized and achievable for a 10 or 11-year-old to try to replicate. And here is some of their work. I try to find canvases, but Panhandle Slim himself paints on recycled and donated materials. So I'll go with whatever canvases people donate to me. I like the thinner board canvases just because they're easier to store, but you can also use thick cardboard. Sometimes I use those plastic corrugated sign backs. Foam core will work. So the recycled repurposing aspect is part of the assignment. So those are all my main projects, but here are a couple extra tips. I have liquid watercolor, but I don't use it in the traditional sense. I use it for two different things. I use it for my stamping project in kindergarten and first. It's thick right out of the bottle, so putting that on a thin sponge on a plastic tray is much more economical and easy for the young kids to use than an actual felt stamping pad. The liquid watercolor works great. I also have a paper towel tie-dye project that we do in third grade, in which they squirt diluted watercolor paint onto folded up paper towels and then unfold it to see the patterns. For painting air dry clay, you can use acrylic. It has a little bit glossier look, of course, nothing close to glaze. It's a little bit messier and harder to clean up. Liquid tempera has a matte finish. I find it much easier to use. But this year I actually used the liquid watercolor, and it's a much more muted result, but I found that I could paint it, pack it, and send it home the same day because it dries so quickly. So if drawing space is an issue in your room, I recommend the watercolor. Ideally, you would teach all of your students to properly care for their brushes on their own from the beginning. But for those of you who do not live in a fantasy world, here are some tips. First of all, segregate your brushes. Well, you may think, oh, well, I don't have a big enough budget to have completely separate sets of brushes, but I'm telling you, your brushes will last far longer and save you more money by keeping them into different classes than putting them all together and letting them get ruined every year. So you want to set for watercolor, smaller, softer. You can mix your tempera and acrylic. They're going to be a little bit larger, a little bit tougher. Although you're going to want to have some of the pointier ones in there, you definitely want these to be a heavier, stronger bristle. If you got a kiln, you've got a set of brushes just for your glaze. And then my lowest of the low brushes, the ones that have seen better days, I keep those for the glue water and also for sharing. So once something has gone beyond being a suitable watercolor brush, I'll move it to tempera and acrylic. I might move it to glaze, and eventually it ends up with the glue water. And anytime a teacher asks, do you have any brushes to share? I have a big supply of brushes and I don't care what happens to them. The watercolor and the tempera brushes, the students can rinse out themselves, and if they do a poor job, it's a quick and easy fix for you. For acrylic paint brushes, I just have them put it into a big tub of soapy water. Elementary students are just not going to have the focus to care for an acrylic paintbrush as carefully as necessary, especially at the end of class. So better to have everything just dumped into the soapy water so that you can go back and deal with it when you have time and not let any acrylic dry on your brush because it was put away the wrong way. However, if that happens, I can't recommend highly enough the Master's Brush Cleaner. It is truly a miracle worker. So usually at the end of acrylic painting, or maybe at the end of the year when I'm packing things up, I will separate out all the acrylic brushes that need a little bit more attention, and I will clean them all together, give them a good soak and a rub with the Master's Brush Cleaner, and then next day rinse them out. And I'm able to save probably more than 80% of the brushes that felt unusable when I started. For water, the best advice I got as a new teacher was dog bowls. The great thing about these dog bowls is they're wide and flat. It is very difficult to knock over one of these dog bowls. I would never have students use something long and tall for their water. You want something low and flat. And even my first graders can carry these back and forth to the sink with minimal spillage. They'll get gunky, but they don't have to be cleaned, and I use these same bowls for whatever kind of paint. Also, get some rags, some actual cloth rags. I use old towels from home that I'm done with. It's good to have a variety of the terry cloth and the flat. Those brown paper towels they have at school are trash. They are not going to soak up anything. The cloth rags are good for emergency spills, for cleaning up at the end of the class, for cleaning the paintbrushes, washing the dishes. I have stacks of cloth rags and towels. So much more effective than paper towels. And make sure the kids know where they are and that they can use them, that they're not the good towels. So if they spill something, they don't have to come to you and say, "Oh, Miss Wineland, I spilled this all over the place." They can just go get the towel. So I hope that quick run through was helpful to you. I'm interested to see how you do things differently or the same. You can post your comments here or on my Facebook. I love to see pictures. This is a community resource, so all the other teachers who watch this will also benefit from any input or comments that you leave either here on YouTube or on the Facebook.